is the Executive Director of the National Lawyers Guild, which is a progressive bar association established in 1937. She is co-host of the weekly civil liberties radio show Law and Disorder on WBAI in New York and several national affiliates. She received a law degree from Temple Law School, where she was editor-in-chief of the Temple Political and Civil Rights Law Review. She has a master's degree in mass communication from Boston University's College of Communications. Heidi, thanks very much for being with us.
It's a true honor to be here. I also have some local connections, as I grew up about 60 minutes south of here on the border of Vermont and New Hampshire. I'm going to talk today about data aggregators and how closely corporations work hand in hand with our government to conduct mass surveillance. Last month, I rented the movie The Manchurian Candidate. I also sent a monthly allotment of $100 to an inmate. I signed a petition on behalf of Mumia Abu-Jamal, and I regularly enter search terms such as NSA surveillance, grand jury resistors, hacktivism onto my computer. Now, each of these transactions taken alone is not deemed sensitive. It doesn't really reveal that much about me, but taken together, a narrative and a profile emerges of my political tastes and my preferences. If that profile is sold or handed over to the government, it could be used to target me for my political views. And as was mentioned earlier, if I'm aware of that, it may curtail how I interact with others. There's also a real risk that the information gathered about me may contain numerous inaccuracies. If my habits indicate a medical or other vulnerability, I could be discriminated against. Corporate data aggregators and data brokers, such as Axiom, Experian, ChoicePoint, have great financial interest in collecting, storing, and analyzing all of our personal transactions. They resell it to third parties, including the US government, for marketing, but for other reasons. They use data mining and data profiling, statistical techniques, and programmatic algorithms to discern relationships between information, and then to assemble that information into profiles, snapshots of an individual or a group's patterns and behavior. They sell these and package us into categories. Classifications may include hard times, extra needy, zero mobility. As David mentioned, with old-fashioned paper records, transactions often weren't documented or stored, and it required human intelligence to go through to make associations literally by digging through vast troves of information, a laborious and often incomplete process. Now we have electronic trails, so that each time you use the ATM, phone card, or complete any recorded transaction, an electronic record is generated. Our birth, court, tax, health, and other records are digitized and available online. Laws such as the Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act, passed in 1994 under the Clinton administration, enhance the ability of law enforcement to conduct electronic monitoring. That act requires telecommunications companies to build in a so-called backdoor, surveillance capabilities that can be accessed by law enforcement agents to monitor us in real time. Corporations, especially telecommunications companies, and financial institutions such as banks, can be forced to give over information to the government, as David mentioned. They can access that information informally. They can do it formally through a subpoena or an administrative measure, or they can outright buy it from commercial data brokers. The data aggregator ChoicePoint has boasted that it has contracts with at least 35 government agencies. An $8 million contract with the Department of Justice permits FBI agents to access the company's database of personal information on individuals, as do contracts with the Drug Enforcement Administration, the US Marshals Service, the IRS, the Bureau of Citizenship and Immigration Services, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. And unlike the government, private companies are not subject to the Fourth Amendment's guarantees against unreasonable searches and seizures. That means they can access our personal information that in many cases the government can't, unless it had probable cause or reasonable suspicion that criminal activity was afoot. A distressed father in Minnesota found out firsthand how information technology has advanced with such speed that privacy safeguards lag far behind. The American retail company Target learned of a teenager's pregnancy, his daughter, before the family she lived with did. Target devised a pregnancy prediction score to entice prospective parents to become loyal customers. Shoppers get a guest ID number linked to their credit card name and email address that keeps their buying history and demographic information. A Target statistician analyzes the purchasing data of women who signed up for Target baby registries. It looked at patterns such as unscented lotion purchases, which typically happen around the second trimester of a pregnancy. And after estimating a woman's delivery date, Target sends coupons to her or her family. The teenage father went in angrily and confronted Target's management, only to find out that in fact his daughter was pregnant. Recently, the Senate Commerce Committee issued a highly critical report of data brokers. Data elements, as they're called, can be highly personal and may include sensitive health and financial information, even our weight. Data aggregation is conducted with direct information from consumers and brokers who often contractually limit other customers from disclosing their data sources. The committee found the largest aggregators have operated in a shroud of secrecy, as David alluded to. Industry categories seemed, in this recent report, to focus on at-risk populations, such as the poor, the elderly, raising questions about whether information can be used in predatory business practices and other unlawful means. The government relies on corporations, and this is why this is such an enormous problem, to conduct approximately 80% of our intelligence efforts. Nearly 2,000 private security firms are engaged in the business of surveillance and counterterrorism. Among these is enormous duplication and waste. We formed, by the Department of Homeland Security after the events of 9/11, so-called fusion centers, where local businesses and law enforcement share information about us, analyze it, keep it in a database. These have been widely criticized as inefficient, highly expensive, and invasions of our privacy. We have a codependent corporate government intelligence state, sustained by a perpetual war on terror, and massive US national defense spending. After the Cold War, military spending decreased, until 9/11, when general fears of another attack permitted the US to recoalesce and reinvigorate military spending, and for companies such as Texas Instruments and others to devise sophisticated surveillance technology to use on us. There's a revolving door between the government and intelligence officials and the corporate defense industry. Something like 80% of over 100 retired 3- and 4-star generals and admirals then took jobs with defense contractors or consultants, and in many instances continued to consult and advise with the Department of Defense, raising serious issues of conflicts of interest. With no end in sight for the war on terror, corporations show little sign of curbing their surveillance initiatives. The quest for global information of an unparalleled level, driven by this country, seems to designed to secure US dominion of information through information control. Unbridled power in the hands of multinational corporations, working with the government, is a powerful tool. It can be a powerful tool of repression. Stored information can be accessed in the future to look for retroactive infractions, so things that are legal now We may not know 10 years from now if they will be criminalized. Personal stored data may be tampered with by personnel, contractors, to change any number of details about our lives, our health history, our financial records, and we have no way to correct what has been acknowledged is greatly inaccurate information in many cases. We don't just have the access to it, we don't know what they have on us. Through my work at the National Lawyers Guild, we defend a lot of protesters across the country. I've seen how corporations invest enormous resources in surveillance of social justice activists, especially when individuals work to draw attention to corporate and government malfeasance. Private risk mitigation companies, which help other businesses identify threats to their profits, regularly monitor political activists. Briefing documents include activists, legislation, special interest groups. In 2010, Jeremy Scahill of The Nation wrote that the biotech giant Monsanto hired subsidiaries of the mercenary firm Blackwater to spy on and infiltrate activists organizing against company practices. Each day, we learn more and more about the close partnership between business and the government. Together, they know everything about us. Well, as David mentioned, they operate under great secrecy and sometimes violate the law with impunity. In becoming beholden to corporations to conduct so much of our national intelligence, we forfeit the hallmarks of good government: oversight, quality control, transparency. Ultimately, we risk jeopardizing national security. I want to read briefly, or just quote from the recent Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board report on NSA bulk photo records program, finding that there was no strong showing of effectiveness to justify altering relationships between citizens and the state, the good relationship that we have, into one that threatens to chill free speech and associational freedoms so essential to a democracy. They found that actually the NSA bulk data program may have confirmed a few instances of terrorist threats, but had done very little to shed new light or lead to new clues. Our privacy is imperiled by the dual interests of a private sector intent on maximizing profits and a government fixated on preventing future terrorist attacks. I believe we have a moment now in history to reclaim our rights through legislation, advocacy, people taking to the streets, and thank you, Senator Sanders, for convening this town hall.